Ava Prescott shivered as she stepped through the towering iron gates of Blackwood Manor, her breath catching at the sheer size of the estate. The mansion loomed before her, a relic of another time, its stone walls weathered yet grand. She had always been fascinated by old houses, and when she heard about the rare tour being offered, she couldn't resist. "This place is massive," she murmured to herself, staring up at the intricate carvings on the double doors as the guide gathered the small group. It was built in the late 1800s. The tour guide, an older woman with sharp eyes and a crisp voice, explained. The Blackwood family owned it for generations, but the last known owner vanished from the public eye years ago. Some say he still lives here. Ava's curiosity piqued. "He disappeared?" she asked, tilting her head. The guide nodded. "No one knows for sure. But the estate remains untouched, as if someone is still taking care of it." Ava glanced around, taking in the pristine hedges and the clean stone steps. Someone was definitely maintaining the house. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, though she wasn't sure if it was from excitement or unease. As the group stepped inside, Ava sucked in a breath. The interior was breathtaking. Dark mahogany floors gleamed under the glow of a massive chandelier, and towering bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound tomes. A fireplace sat cold and empty at the far end of the grand hall, but the air carried the faintest scent of burning wood, as if someone had used it not too long ago. "Wow," she whispered, her fingers grazing the smooth wood of an antique table. "Everything here is original," the guide continued. "The Blackwood family spared no expense." Rumor has it the last owner was a young millionaire who inherited the estate but never wanted the attention that came with his wealth. Ava frowned. A millionaire who lived in seclusion? She couldn't imagine that kind of life trapped in an old house hidden from the world. She let the group move ahead while she lingered near a grand piano, its surface polished to a mirror shine. She could almost hear the echo of music of someone playing in the dead of night. "You're not supposed to wander off." The deep voice sent a jolt through her body. She spun around, her heart hammering. A man stood in the doorway, partially hidden in the shadows. He was tall, with jet black hair that was slightly tousled as if he had just run his fingers through it. His striking blue eyes locked onto her, filled with something unreadable. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, and dark slacks that hinted at effortless wealth. I was just looking," Ava stammered. His eyes flicked to the tour group before settling back on her. "Most people don't stray," he said, stepping closer. His presence was magnetic, drawing her in despite the warning in his tone. She swallowed. Do you live here?" For a moment he said nothing. Then, with the faintest tilt of his head, he answered, "Yes." Ava's eyes widened. "Wait, you're the owner?" "Nathaniel Thorn," he confirmed, studying her reaction. Her breath hitched. The reclusive millionaire. The man people whispered about, the one who supposedly vanished from public life. And here he was, standing in front of her, very much real. She forced herself to recover. "I didn't think anyone actually lived here." Nathaniel's lips curved slightly, though it wasn't quite a smile. "Most don't." Ava glanced back toward the group. "Why allow tours if you live here?" "Because I find it amusing," he admitted, his gaze lingering on her. "People come here expecting ghosts, mysteries. They never expect me." Her pulse quickened. There was something about him, an intensity in his eyes, a quiet confidence that made her feel like she was being carefully studied. "Are you coming?" The tour guide's voice broke the moment. Ava hesitated before nodding. "Yeah," she said, stepping away. But as she turned, she felt his eyes on her, lingering. And for some reason, she knew this wouldn't be the last time they spoke. Ava couldn't shake the encounter as she rejoined the tour group. Nathaniel Thorn. The man was a living ghost, hidden in plain sight within the walls of his own home. She glanced back toward the darkened hallway where he had stood, but he was gone, as if he had never been there at all. The tour continued, but Ava wasn't listening anymore. Her mind raced with questions. Why had he chosen to live like this, shrouded in secrecy? What kind of man allowed strangers to wander through his home but remained unseen? More importantly, why had he revealed himself to her? They reached the ballroom, a vast space illuminated by golden chandeliers that cast soft light across the polished floors. The air was thick with history, whispers of elegant dances and forgotten celebrations lingering in the silence. As the group marveled at the grandeur, Ava wandered toward the tall windows. Beyond them, the sprawling grounds stretched into the evening mist. A movement near the tree line caught her eye, a figure barely visible watching from the shadows. Her breath caught. Nathaniel. Before she could react, the tour guide announced the end of their visit. The group filed toward the exit, but Ava hesitated. Something about this place, about him, made it impossible to simply walk away. She turned, half expecting Nathaniel to have vanished again, but this time he stepped forward, emerging from the darkness like a man who had spent too long in the shadows. "You're lingering," he observed. Ava crossed her arms, meeting his gaze. "So are you." His lips parted slightly, as if her response had caught him off guard. For a man who kept himself hidden, he didn't seem entirely opposed to conversation. "Most visitors don't notice me," he admitted. "I don't think you wanted to be noticed before." A flicker of something unreadable crossed his expression before he gestured toward the doors. "You should go before they lock the gates." Ava studied him for a moment. There was no urgency in his voice, no real insistence, just a quiet acknowledgement that she didn't belong in his world. And yet he had revealed himself. Instead of leaving, she asked, "Why do you stay here?" "Alone." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I prefer it that way." She tilted her head. "That's not an answer." He exhaled, his gaze flickering toward the towering ceiling as if searching for patience. "The world outside this house has expectations. Demands. Here, I don't have to meet them." Ava considered his words. A man with wealth and power, yet he had chosen solitude over everything else. "Sounds lonely," she said. His eyes darkened. "Perhaps." Silence stretched between them, charged with something neither of them acknowledged. Ava wasn't sure what compelled her to push further. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not like another faceless visitor, but as someone who had disrupted the careful balance of his world. She stepped closer. "You don't seem like someone who enjoys being hidden." Nathaniel's gaze dropped to hers, sharp and assessing. "And you don't seem like someone who follows rules." A slow smile tugged at her lips. "Not when they don't make sense." Something shifted in his expression. A flicker of amusement, perhaps, or curiosity. Before she could say more, the distant sound of the gates being prepared for closing echoed through the halls. "You should go," Nathaniel said, softer this time. Ava hesitated before nodding. "I'll see you around then." His expression remained unreadable. "Will you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked away, her pulse thrumming with the certainty that this wouldn't be the last time she set foot inside Blackwood Manor. And somehow she knew neither of them wanted it to be. Ava didn't return to Blackwood Manor right away, no matter how much the thought lingered in the back of her mind. It should have been just another tour, another moment of fleeting curiosity, but Nathaniel Thorn had changed that. There was something about him, something that pulled her in despite the warning in his eyes. Days passed, and yet she found herself walking the streets near the estate, her feet carrying her closer as if drawn by some unseen force. The world outside Blackwood Manor felt too ordinary after stepping into its shadows. Then, one evening, as the sky darkened to a deep indigo, she found herself standing outside the gates once more. The grand iron bars loomed before her, silent and imposing, but this time they were slightly ajar. Ava hesitated. Trespassing wasn't exactly on her list of wise decisions, but something about the open gate felt like an invitation. Swallowing her hesitation, she slipped through, her steps light against the gravel path leading toward the mansion. The house stood as it had before, silent, watchful. But unlike during the tour, the lanterns lining the front entrance were lit, casting a warm glow against the stone walls. Before she could second-guess herself, the door opened. Nathaniel stood in the threshold, his gaze unreadable as he studied her. He wasn't surprised. If anything, he looked as if he had been expecting her. "You came back," he said, his voice low. Ava met his eyes. "You left the gate open." He considered that before stepping aside. "Then come in." Every fiber of logic told her to turn around, to remind herself that she had no business stepping into this world again. But she didn't move back. She stepped forward. The warmth of the house wrapped around her as she crossed the threshold. Unlike during the tour, the space felt different now, less like a relic, more like a place someone truly lived in. The faint scent of old books and burning wood filled the air. Nathaniel closed the door behind her, his movements unhurried. Most people don't return. I'm not most people, Ava replied. A flicker of something passed through his expression before he gestured toward the grand hall. Walk with me. She followed him through the dimly lit corridors, the sound of their footsteps the only thing filling the silence. They stopped in the library, a vast room lined with towering shelves, each overflowing with books that had seen more years than she had. A fire crackled in the grand hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Nathaniel leaned against the edge of a desk, watching her as she took in the room. You ask too many questions, he said eventually. She turned to face him. You hide too many answers. His lips tilted slightly, though there was something guarded in his expression. And what exactly do you think you'll find here, Ava? The way he said her name sent a shiver down her spine. Maybe I just wanted to know why you let strangers walk through your home but never let them see you, she said. He was quiet for a moment before he gestured toward the fire. Sit. She hesitated before lowering herself into one of the aged leather chairs. Nathaniel sat across from her, the firelight casting golden hues across his face. I grew up in this house, he said, his voice quieter now. It was never just a home, it was an expectation. A legacy I never asked for. Ava listened, her curiosity deepening. When my family was gone, I inherited everything. The wealth, the responsibility, the name. His fingers tapped lightly against the armrest. I tried living the life people expected of me. I traveled, attended the right events, spoke to the right people. But it never felt real. So you disappeared? She asked. His gaze met hers, piercing. I chose solitude over a life that wasn't mine. She studied him, the man who had built walls around himself not just in this house, but within his own existence. Does it ever feel lonely? She asked. Nathaniel was silent for a long moment. Then, barely above a whisper, he answered, not until recently. The weight of those words settled between them, something unspoken crackling in the air. Ava's pulse quickened, but she didn't look away. I don't regret staying, he continued. But you, he exhaled, shaking his head slightly. You don't belong in this world. She tilted her head. And yet, here I am. His fingers curled slightly against the chair's armrest. That's what concerns me. Ava leaned forward, her voice steady. Maybe you don't mind being found as much as you think you do. Nathaniel held her gaze, the firelight flickering between them. For the first time, he didn't have an answer. Ava hadn't planned on returning to Blackwood Manor after that night. She told herself it was curiosity that had brought her back before, but now it was something else entirely. Something deeper. It wasn't just the house or the mystery of Nathaniel's seclusion that pulled her in, it was him. The way he looked at her, as if she was something unexpected, something he hadn't prepared for. And maybe she hadn't been prepared for him either. The evening air was crisp as she approached the estate once more, the towering iron gates standing ajar just as they had before. She hesitated for only a moment before slipping through, her footsteps light against the gravel path. The lanterns flanking the entrance were lit, casting a golden glow against the stone facade. Her pulse quickened as she reached the door, but before she could knock, it opened. Nathaniel stood in the threshold, his expression unreadable. I knew you'd come back, he said. There was no arrogance in his voice, no assumption, just quiet certainty. Ava stepped inside without hesitation, the warmth of the house wrapping around her like a familiar embrace. The fire in the grand hall was already burning, casting flickering light against the dark wood paneling. Nathaniel led her toward the same library where they had talked before, but this time there was something different in the air between them. The distance he had once maintained now felt thinner, as if he had stopped trying to keep her at arm's length. She settled into one of the leather chairs while he poured 2 glasses of deep amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He handed her one before sinking into the chair across from her. I told myself I wouldn't let this happen, he admitted. She arched a brow. Let what happen? His fingers curled around the glass, his gaze steady. You. The confession sent a shiver down her spine. Ava took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle in her chest before setting the glass down. And yet you left the gate open. His lips parted slightly, as if her words had caught him off guard. She leaned forward, resting her arms on her knees. You knew I'd walk through that door again, just like I knew you'd be waiting. Nathaniel exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. You make it sound inevitable, isn't it? He studied her for a long moment before standing abruptly. He crossed the room, staring into the fire as if the flames held answers he couldn't find elsewhere. "I was content before," he said. Ava rose to her feet, closing the distance between them. "Were you?" His jaw tightened. It was easier. She reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his wrist. Easier isn't the same as better. Nathaniel turned then, and in the glow of the firelight, his expression was raw, unshielded in a way she hadn't seen before. "This isn't supposed to happen," he said again, but this time the words lacked conviction. Ava's heart pounded. "But it is." For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was charged, every unspoken thought crackling like the fire behind them. Then, as if some invisible thread had finally pulled too tight to resist, he closed the space between them. His hand found her waist, tentative at first, as if he was still fighting the inevitable. But the second she leaned into him, the hesitation vanished. His lips met hers, slow and deliberate, as if he was memorizing the moment. The taste of whiskey lingered between them, mixing with something else, something unmistakably them. Ava's hands slid up his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath her fingertips. He wasn't untouched by this. He wasn't unaffected. When they finally pulled apart, his forehead rested lightly against hers. "I've spent years keeping people out," he murmured. Ava's fingers curled against his shirt. "Then let me in." Nathaniel exhaled a breath that felt like surrender. "I think you already are." The weight of those words settled between them, undeniable. And for the first time since stepping into Blackwood Manor, Ava knew she wasn't just a visitor anymore. The storm rolled in without warning. One moment, the night was clear, the sky stretched like black velvet above the estate. The next, thick clouds swallowed the stars and rain began to fall in a steady, relentless rhythm against the windows of Blackwood Manor. Ava stood near the grand fireplace, watching droplets race down the glass panes. The warmth from the fire curled around her, but it did nothing to quiet the storm raging inside her. Nathaniel hadn't spoken much since their kiss. He hadn't pulled away, hadn't sent her back through the gates, but he had retreated in a different way. His mind was elsewhere, tangled in thoughts he hadn't shared. She turned from the window, her gaze finding him across the room. He stood near the tall bookshelves, his fingers lightly tracing the spine of an old volume, though he wasn't reading. His expression was unreadable, but his tension was unmistakable. She wasn't going to let him disappear into himself again. "You're thinking too much," she said. His hand stilled. He didn't look at her right away, but she could tell he had heard every word. "I should be," he finally replied. "Everything about this is unexpected," she finished for him. His blue eyes met hers, and for the briefest moment, something flickered there, something raw, something vulnerable. "Yes." Ava crossed the room, stopping just short of touching him. Then stopped thinking. Nathaniel let out a breath, low and unsteady. "That's not who I am." She tilted her head, studying him. "Who are you?" His jaw tensed, but not out of frustration. More like hesitation. "For years, I convinced myself I didn't need anyone," he admitted. "That if I kept my distance, I wouldn't have to watch people leave. That I could control how much of myself I gave away." Ava's chest tightened. "But you let me in," she said softly. His fingers curled slightly against the edge of the bookshelf. "You weren't supposed to stay." The words sent a strange ache through her. She had stepped into this house as a stranger, a visitor passing through. But now she wasn't sure she could leave. Not without taking something of him with her. She reached for his hand, lightly brushing her fingers against his. "Maybe I don't want to go." Nathaniel's entire body stilled at her touch. His eyes searched hers, as if trying to find some hidden answer, some assurance that she wouldn't regret this. "You don't know what you're signing up for," he said, voice quiet but firm. Ava tightened her grip slightly. "Then tell me." His throat worked as he swallowed. "My life isn't simple, Ava. It never has been. I built these walls for a reason. But they don't keep me out," she said. A muscle in his jaw ticked. "No, they don't." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the steady crackle of the fire and the distant sound of rain against the windows. Then, as if something inside him finally gave way, Nathaniel lifted his free hand and cupped her face, his thumb brushing lightly over her cheek. "If you stay," he murmured, "there's no going back." Ava's heart pounded, but she didn't hesitate. "I don't want to go back." His lips parted slightly, as if her words had unraveled something inside him. Then, without another breath of hesitation, he kissed her again. But this time it wasn't slow or uncertain. It wasn't the careful exploration of before. This was something deeper, something that burned. Ava melted into him, her arms sliding around his neck as he pulled her closer, as if he had finally accepted that she was here, that she was real. The storm outside raged on, but inside Blackwood Manor, a different kind of storm had settled. One neither of them wanted to escape. Nathaniel's kiss lingered on Ava's lips long after the fire had dimmed and the storm outside had settled into a soft drizzle. Neither of them spoke for a long time, caught in the gravity of what had just happened. Something had shifted between them, something neither of them could ignore. Ava's fingers traced idle patterns against the fabric of Nathaniel's sleeve as he sat beside her on the velvet chaise near the fire. His presence was steady, warm, and for the first time since stepping into Blackwood Manor, she felt like she belonged. But reality was creeping in. She had come into his world uninvited, and yet she wasn't certain if she could ever truly leave it now. Nathaniel's voice broke the silence, low and contemplative. "I never expected you to stay." Ava turned to face him, her gaze unwavering. "And yet you keep making space for me." His lips parted slightly, but no argument came. Instead, he exhaled as if conceding to something inevitable. She tilted her head. "What now?" Nathaniel's fingers tightened slightly against the armrest. "You tell me." Ava studied him, the man who had spent years hiding within these walls, the man who had locked himself away from the world. He had built a fortress around himself, but she had found her way in. And now she wasn't sure she could ever step back out. "You can't live like this forever," she said gently. His jaw tensed, but he didn't look away. "I've tried the alternative. It wasn't worth the cost." Ava hesitated before reaching for his hand. "What if this time it is?" Nathaniel's fingers curled around hers, his grip firm. But there was something else there. Something unspoken. A question. A hesitation. She leaned closer. "You don't have to do this alone." His breath hitched slightly, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he studied her as if trying to decide whether she was real, whether this moment wasn't just another dream. "You're asking me to step back into a world I left behind," he murmured. Ava shook her head. "I'm not asking you to go back. I'm asking you to move forward." A flicker of something passed through his expression. A realization. A choice. Then slowly he nodded. The days that followed were different. The house felt different. Nathaniel no longer lingered in the shadows. He walked beside her, showing her pieces of his world he had never shared with anyone else. They wandered through the endless halls, explored rooms long untouched, and spent hours in the library, lost in conversations that stretched late into the night. And then, one morning, he did something Ava never thought he would. He took her hand and led her through the grand entrance, past the iron gates, and into the city beyond. The world saw him again that day. The whispers started immediately. The reclusive millionaire stepping back into the light. And at his side, the woman who had pulled him from the shadows. There were questions, speculation, but Nathaniel never wavered. He held her hand as they walked through the streets, as if silently telling the world that he had made his choice. And Ava knew without a doubt that he had chosen her. Months passed, and Blackwood Manor no longer stood as a place of solitude. It was still grand, still filled with its whispered history, but now it was alive. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Nathaniel led Ava to the gardens behind the estate. The air was thick with the scent of blooming roses, the sky painted in hues of gold and violet. She turned to him, her heart pounding. "Why do I feel like you're up to something?" Nathaniel's lips curved slightly, his fingers tightening around hers. "Because I am." Before she could react, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Ava's breath caught. Nathaniel dropped to one knee, his gaze never leaving hers. "I spent years thinking I didn't need anyone," he said. "That if I kept myself locked away, I couldn't lose anything. But then you walked through my door and suddenly everything changed." Ava's eyes burned with unshed tears. "I don't want to hide anymore," Nathaniel continued. "I don't want to live in the past. I want a future. With you." He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the last light of the setting sun. "Ava Prescott, will you marry me?" Ava let out a shaky breath, her heart thundering against her ribs. There was no hesitation, no doubt. "Yes," she whispered. Nathaniel's exhale was almost a laugh, filled with something close to relief. He slipped the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms, holding her as if he never planned to let go. And he never would. The wedding took place in Blackwood Manor, but this time the doors were open. The house that had once been a place of solitude was now filled with laughter, with warmth, with life. As Ava stood at the grand entrance, her white gown trailing behind her, she met Nathaniel's gaze from across the hall. He reached for her, his touch steady, his promise unspoken but understood. They had found each other in the unlikeliest of places. And now they would never be apart again.